Livestream the introduction.
And we are live. Welcome to this live stream. Today we're going to do something fun. We're going to not build a full featured e-commerce storefront, but we're going to take a look at how we can connect SvelteKit and also figure out what the difference is with Crystallize using something called Houdini, and styling will be done in Tailwind. My name is Bård, and I have Daria here with me.
Hi, I'm just here to ask questions.
Yeah. This is actually a reverse, because usually I'm there to ask questions, right? But
So I'm enjoying this.
That's good. Okay. So what you see on the screen here is basically the end result, where you have a very, very simple storefront in SvelteKit, Houdini, Tailwind, and Crystallize running on Vercel, to mention all of the tech that is going into this. But maybe we should start at the top.
Is there any reason you went with Svelte though?
Yeah, I've heard about it in more and more meetings with partners and developers. That when we talk about Remix, React, Next.js, etc., usually we get questions about what about SvelteKit. We want to do a project on that. So that's basically the reason why this happened.
So this is your first time working with Svelte?
Indeed it is. So it will be an in-depth tutorial with the lessons I learned during maybe 5 hours of work I did on this.
Yep.
And of course, when I got started with this Svelte, I didn't know anything. I just had heard the name. And from what I can understand, it's kind of like React, but different. So it's an open source front-end framework or language or JavaScript preprocessor, or as we call it in the old days, a templating language that basically takes the syntax, the Svelte syntax, and convert it into pure JavaScript. So that's the foundation for the front-end stuff we'll do today. We also have this guy. I'm not sure, are you aware of SvelteKit, Daria?
I've heard about it. Haven't worked with it yet.
We'll look at it today, and my understanding, and it's very it's very good to hear that my understanding when we're going to walk through this. But basically, it's if you look at Svelte as React, I would say SvelteKit is like Next.js. So you have server-side rendering, you have the routing, you have the possibilities of doing what you call transitions, etc. So it's basically the framework around the Svelte syntax, which is what is converting the Svelte syntax into JavaScript code. So that would be the foundation for the front-end part of things. I also learned 2 weeks ago, I think, that there's a disappearing GraphQL client.
I just wanted to ask something.
Oh yeah, on this guy?
Well, how's the developer experience if you're working with it for the first time?
When you've hooked up SvelteKit and Houdini and Crystallize, there's some magic happening behind the scenes. I felt that the syntax was quite straightforward and simple. I feel that I'm writing less code. Maybe cleaner separation of concerns than React. I don't know, but that's at least my feeling from this small example here. I like it. It's fast.
Yeah.
Then this guy. So Houdini, it's basically a GraphQL client, and in essence, it's for SvelteKit and React. And basically, you have your query, and then in your page, the data is immediately available. So it kind of abstracts all the fetching and all the things that is required when you're tinkering with GraphQL. And it's very simple examples we will do here, but Houdini has subscriptions, paginations, and fragments, etc. Full support for that. A disclaimer: we can just use fetch function in JavaScript if we want to do a GraphQL query. We don't have to have a client. Many times that's how I prefer to work with GraphQL, but in this case we have the full-blown disappearing GraphQL library that we use.
Yeah.
There is also Tailwind here, which is used for styling. We will not talk too much about that because that's not really the point of connecting the dots there. And then we have this guy. So this is what we will use as a backend. This is Crystallize, which is a headless e-commerce service, all powered by GraphQL. And in essence, we have here a quite simple shop where we have 6 products, which are basically donuts. And they have quite a simple structure. You have some nutritional information, you have some meta information, images, prices, some size variants, etc. What we use in order to get access to this data, because this here is of course the admin interface in Crystallize, where you can work and edit the data in pretty and nerdy view, as we call it. But we are going to play with this as a developer now. And then we have this guy. So this here is basically the GraphQL I, as it's called, basically the UI to work with the GraphQL API. One of many available, but this is the one we bundle with our API. And here basically you can put in a query and then you get the data out. For those that don't know GraphQL, it's basically 2 things that I like. One is that it's simple to work with. If I want to fetch more data, you have autocomplete, and the developer experience is, I would say, pretty nice with GraphQL. And then since you're only getting back what you ask for, you can optimize also the payload size. So you can have queries that are optimized for just fetching the data that you're after. So I have 2 queries here, which we'll get back to, which is basically a query to fetch the data on the front page, a grid, which we saw here in the Crystallize admin, and a list of products, and then we have the actual end product themselves. We'll not go into the structure of what we call the shapes and products in Crystallize or the GraphQL side of things. We have other videos that do that. What we want to do now is basically take a look at the boilerplate that we created. This is basically, it's a very small example connecting SvelteKit with Crystallize via Houdini using the GraphQL query language. And this is an open source boilerplate, so you can check it out. You can obviously clone it, and pull requests are welcome. Can be useful just to have a look, or if you're curious on how all of these things connect together. But if we want to do this locally, what we can do is essentially git clone. This is now we're hacking. And then we can install. So npm is a package manager for that basically installs every requirement, all the libraries that are being used here, etc. And then we have npm run dev, I'm assuming. So that is what is required to get the developer environment running locally. So I cloned the code, I installed the dependencies, and then I also have it up and running on localhost. So the kind of the developer experience to get started with this, it's seconds and you're up and running, right? And this is now running from my localhost, connecting, of course, to the Crystallize donut tenant, which basically has the products and the images and all of that. Okay.
So if I wanted to get the demo data though, does the boilerplate include the demo data or?
No, it does not. It basically just accesses the tenant that we have here, and it's very simple. This is a public tenant, so the API is open. You can access the data there, and then you can create your own tenant and load it up with some products and use the same structure. But it's not like the other boilerplates that we will mention in the end, which are more fully featured, but with more features come complexity also. So we want to make a very simple example there. Mm-hmm. But we have this now running locally, and I have here basically the code from the repository. So let's go through it line by line. No, let's not. Yeah. So what we should start with. So basically, what you want to figure out is the routing, meaning if you have an inbound request, which page is being executed, or what file is being executed. And without going too deep into the structure of SvelteKit, you basically have the under routes. That is where you add all of the index page, and in this case also the product pages, which are the two routes that we have created in this example. I can zoom in a little bit also. For the slash root, it's basically 3 files that we care about here in this example. The first one, maybe we'll start there with the layout, because this is also a little bit different than what you see in React, because this feels more like a, I don't know, HTML templating language, kind of. That's the feel I get. You don't have all the curly brackets and JavaScript fanciness, basically. That's how I see it. So it's very straightforward, it seems. Basically, what is going on here is that we have defined a header, we have defined a footer, and then there's a slot, which is the syntax from SvelteKit, which basically loads the page. In this case, we have the layout for the whole site, meaning the front page and the product pages, and then we have the actual page.svelte, which is, well, you were asking earlier. This is basically the syntax to, let's call it index.html on a web server back in the day. This is just the syntax for this is what SvelteKit is looking for when it's rendering, plus page.svelte in a root, and then it renders it as the default.
So there is a global layout, but can each folder have its own layout? Can we define multiple layouts?
Yes, you can, he says, without having checked. But I'm pretty sure you can just move the layout file in the root, and it will override it. Mm-hmm. Anything else would be stupid, I think. Yeah. So it's pretty simple and straightforward, and also with the on the root, I can also override the head setting, for example, meta tags here. Here it's just static for the index page, saying that it's a demo. So basically on this page here, it's what we should notice is basically the script in the beginning, where we have, of course, a comment to load the page data. That's how you do it in proper language. But basically, this is how you load the page data from the Houdini GraphQL server, the client, sorry. Which is kind of dead simple, because we have a page.gql, GraphQL, which is essentially just the query directly from the Explorer I showed. So this is just exactly what I need to fetch the data for, in this case, a specific grid with some rows, some columns, some items, and then you want to have the name, price, and image of the product. That's essentially what we're fetching here. This here, I don't think you have the same concept in React. So it's a data store, they call it, which is basically a variable or an object, or where you also can subscribe to changes. And it has kind of, I don't know if it's comparable with use effect and use state or something like this, but it's essentially a variable that you can subscribe to changes for. For example, if you're updating async parts of the page when things are loading. What we're doing in this case is basically we're just getting the front page grid directly. This is the syntax to set up this data store from the Houdini data, which is basically the results from Crystallize converted into an object in Svelte. And then we have the actual rendering. This here is just the styling. This is Tailwind syntax. That is not the topic that we'll talk about today, but in essence, we're just looping over the columns and rows and rendering all of the products with the prices and the image for each of the parts of the grid. In essence, this is what you see here, where we have a cell that is spanning over 3 columns. We have 3 columns, and then we have another span, and then we have some more products. Essentially, just rendering the grid that you saw in Crystallize.
So we can just edit the way the grid is displayed if you just edited it in Crystallize. We don't need to make any code changes.
Exactly. So what we do here is, well, it's basically not going to be a CSS tutorials, but this used to be hard. If you were, but there's something called grids in CSS now. So you can basically just spin up a grid, define that it's three columns, equal fractions, and then we have a call span, and then we do the fetch layout call span from Crystallize, which is then saying how many columns this this row should span over. So quite neat. So you have dynamic rendering based on actual setup of the grid there. But it's kind of neat, the syntax here also. It's they do some funky stuff. For example, with if else. This to me, it's hash if expression, and then it's curly bracket colon else, and then you end with slash if. So it's kind of a little bit mixing up. I guess it's a special syntax for Svelte.
It does look clean like that.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So this is basically what you need in order to get data from Crystallize. Being said, when I set this up in the Houdini config, which is the configuration file for Houdini, surprise, surprise, you have to set the endpoint, which is the API crystallize.com/donut/catalog. This is our catalog API endpoint for the donut tenant. And once that is set up, you can just create a file, page.graphql. Houdini will look for that, and with the data loader on top here, it magically just fetches the variables and basically allows you to use the data directly. So it kind of takes away all the work.
Cool.
What's next here?
Do we have dynamic routing?
Yeah, we do. There's a couple of ways actually you can do it. I figured you can do, so it's all about not curly, square brackets. So here under roots, we do a shop/path. And then we have the path, which is then being set as a variable available in the roots that you get here. And again, under the path, this is dynamic. So anything under shop/something will resolve to this file. And you have a variable called path that you can use to do stuff with. The loading is pretty much the same here, but what we will do in this case is actually, because we can't just have a static query as we have here, right? Because we actually have to fetch the specific product that we're querying. In this case, this is then done with the plus page.js, and this is basically a JavaScript file which is executed before the page.svelte file. So like a middleware or preprocessor or whatever the proper name for that is. In essence, we basically then do the GraphQL query here, but with some variables. We set the path and we set the language as variables because we want it to be a dynamic query, which when you work with products and Crystallize, you typically have dynamic queries because the URLs change if it's a relation or if it's on the, so this is typically what you would end up with. Not to go through the query too much, but basically we fetch the default variant with the image. We do also fetch some of the components, as we call it. So the brief, the nutrition, the body of the product. And then the magic point here is just that we set the path to be the path name, which is the full path of the or URI of the request. And we set that as the path variable, which is then passed to the query, and we have a dynamic query. So that's the difference where we can use for static queries the GraphQL files. For dynamic queries, dynamic in the way that you want to send a parameter to it, you use the page.js. If we then take a look at the actual file, which is then page.svelte, again, this is the file that is rendering all the inbound requests, which basically means if we switch to the front end, anytime I click here, we have shop/trouble family box is what it says there. We have the mixed delight. So these are the URLs that are then changing and that we're passing along to the query, and that gives us different data. To render or to get the data again, it's dead simple. Product name, and here I use the actual transformed HTML from Crystallize. You probably would use the JSON version in production where you have more control over the rendering, but this is a shorthand to have our default rendering of the rich text coming from Crystallize. You fetch the default variant with the first image. We have the pricing, and then we render the body, and the body is basically a repeating structure of a title. We have the rich text, and then we have basically one or more images here. So pretty straightforward. We also render a nutritional table, which is an example of how you can do a little bit structured data in Crystallize. For example, like this. And yes, I centered this pink background myself. So do hire me for CSS work. Yeah.
It's design choices.
It's design choices. It's just a little bit offbeat. It's beautiful. It makes it more interesting, right? Than if it was totally perfect. So all in all, I would say it's really straightforward. You had a query, you can load it statically or dynamically. Then the data is automatically set. One thing that I did have some issues with is that the first time, of course, this is being, so if I render this now, then this is being rendered on the server. Everything is fine, but if I do click here, did you see that little flash?
Yeah.
So, which basically means that it's client side, it's rendering the layout. Then it waits for the query to be fetched from Crystallize, set into the page data, and then we render that fragment. So what we have to do there is basically, if we go to here the root, we have the state that where you can check if it's fetching, basically so that you can have a loader. That is the proper way of doing it, but I don't have an else statement here, so I just check if not fetching. So if I'm done with fetching, I'm going to render this. That's why you have a flash event style content, or you have this loading state, which is not totally, I would say, not totally pretty. And this is something that you can fix then with a little bit more proper loading of the product data. And if you don't check the state, it will actually try to render it, but the variable won't be set, so it will crash. Or you have to use the magic of. Now I'm talking about stuff that I don't really know, but is it conditional chaining? This thing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it only will render this if product is set. If product is not set, is doing that. So, but that's because I'm a novice on these things that I ran into this. This is, I guess, the fun with JavaScript in these modern frameworks, where you have server side, you have client side, and you have async, and everything is behaving a little bit differently. But basically, you have to check the loading state, or if you have the data here, and then you could either do some optimistic rendering, or you can do just say loading. One thing that you will notice is that if I'm hovering, it will happen instantly, because as in Next and Remix, SvelteKit is also prefetching. So
do you have to have like an additional setting for it, or does it just happen by default?
It happens by default. I'm sure you can tweak it also. I didn't dive into that, but what I do like here is that the syntax is basically wrong file. They're using the A tags. So basically, they're just taking over the anchor tag and adding preload in there, instead of doing a link component, which is, I guess, the React way of doing it.
Yep.
Or what else? One thing with Houdini that we figured out, or Vasil figured out, because when I was fetching product as a product list, I got the same data in all of them, because it's product at the same level in the query. And we have in Crystallize, we have something called component ID. And if you fetch a component ID, like description, first image, or body, Houdini will magically try to cache this based on ID. But that is not the case in this setup. So you just have to remove the cache by ID, as is default with Houdini, and that is basically done in the Houdini config.js, and it's this magic line here, default keys. And that's also how you can optimize then cache keys in Houdini. This is such a simple example. We don't want any caching. Similar to Apollo, if you do a lot of, I mean, what do you say? What are the two hardest things? Caching is one of them, at least. The other is naming, I guess. Yeah, so we disable the caching here, and the APIs in Crystallize are so fast, so you can just hit them dynamically anyway.
Is there something that was like, as your first time working with it, is there something that was a bit complicated to grasp? Or?
Yeah, I got the caching and also the client-side rendering that I actually have the data store, and I have to check if the data is loaded. But that is because I'm not writing this kind of code every day. All in all, it's pretty straightforward. It's not like you have to look up the syntax here, right? This is a pretty simple syntax. I guess the most complex stuff here is Tailwind.
Yeah.
If you don't know it, it's magic. It's shorthand for CSS magic, right? So I think it's a really straightforward. It seems a lot less client-side heavy than, let's say, Next.js, which is loading a lot of JavaScript. Not sure how it compared to like Astro that you've been working with, but it seems like it's a good foundation to make something really performant.
It looks like a really good start to if you just want to get started with Crystallize, you can just get this, install this boilerplate and play around with the data at least.
Yeah, and you can use it as a basis for, if you're building a web shop, or if you just want to have content in Crystallize and have it rendered, you can use this setup. To me, I think it was quicker to learn than React Next.js, because it's closer to HTML somehow in the syntax, and they're doing some magic stuff, but all in all, it's pretty straightforward to figure out.
Yeah.
This is not a complete implementation. I did not implement responsive images, which means that in Crystallize, I am just fetching the image you upload, basically. As I showed earlier, you can, of course, ask for the variants, which are we do width and we do height. Then we have the variants of all the images. So the web piece, the AVIF version of the different responsive images. So that needs to be done. You can read the blog post on that on our website, React Source It for responsive images, on how to, if you're not familiar with sizes and source sets, that is important. You won't be able to build performant web pages without it, unless you just have tiny AVIF images as what you upload, but that's probably not what you have. Did not implement the cart and checkout and everything there. So it's just now rendering the front page grid and the product landing page. We do have
examples.
Yes, and I think you've made it, no? Or what?
Sebastian, both.
Okay. Yeah, because the idea with the SvelteKit boilerplate, just connecting the technologies together. For a more full-featured boilerplate, we have the Next.js and Remix boilerplate, which has also the service API, the full checkout. It's much more full-featured, discounting, price lists, authentication, my page, things like that. And here you can, of course, reuse a lot of the code there. So that was also not part of the scope there. So at least it's a quick introduction to how you can connect SvelteKit via Houdini to Crystallize, have it styled with Tailwind. And the project is open source. Pull requests are welcome. And if there's any other frameworks that you would like to see connected to Crystallize, please join our Slack community. And we'll see if we are not able to make a small example for that.
Yeah.
But on that note, I think we're through, as we say. Have a good one. See you in the next one.
Bye.